I'm an international lawyer by training, so I teach international law, and in the course of my research, it's just sort of drifted toward issues of weapons proliferation, particularly legal issues, the treaties and regimes that try to regulate weapons proliferation, the limits and the role of those treaties in international politics.
Iran and North Korea's nuclear ambitions are always in the news. Does this mean that the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty's lost its teeth?
I think each of these cases, Iran and North Korea, as well as India, which we'll talk about in a second, illustrate the limitations of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was just a big political deal that the nuclear weapon states, there were 5 nuclear weapon states, and the deal was that they get to have nuclear weapons, whereas all the other members of the NPT, the non-nuclear weapon states, agreed not to have nuclear weapons in exchange for access to civilian nuclear energy technologies from nuclear weapon states. So this was the big political bargain. For example, now getting to the case studies, Iran is being brought before the Security Council, has been at the IAEA, is now in the Security Council, because it was discovered that Iran has been experimenting with uranium enrichment. And there's a suspicion that they are developing a weapons program. Well, if you look back at South Korea in 2002, there was a revelation that South Korea had uranium enrichment experiments. And the difference in application of the NP Treaty rules in both these cases, meaning that in South Korea's case, essentially nothing was done. It was just sort of brushed aside. And it's likely that most people haven't even heard of that before. But everyone has heard of Iran. And Iran thus feels that it's being prejudicial, the terms are being prejudicially applied to it. Another example is North Korea, that North Korea has tested a nuclear weapon, and now they're dragged before the Security Council. Well, in 1974, India, and then later Pakistan, tested nuclear weapons, and there was some initial sort of poo-pooing by the international community, but essentially, they got on with it, and both are now accepted as nuclear weapons state outside the NPT. These inconsistencies of application are undermining the NPT, I think, as a principled instrument and hurting its application.
So how can the UN control countries that it believes to be a threat?
Sanctions themselves tend to be effective only in the long term, if at all, not in the short term. They don't tend to affect state behavior in the short term. In fact, they often tend to entrench the behavior that they're trying to deter, entrench the desire for nuclear weapons as a deterrent, for example. So I think that the stick approach in international politics tends not to work very well unless you are willing to take the fullest step of use of force to change the regime like we've seen in Iraq, and that itself, of course, comes with its own problems. As opposed to the stick approach, you could talk about the sort of a carrot approach of trying to persuade states based on their interest to abandon the nuclear weapons programs that they have. This actually has a pretty decent track record. If you look at the NPT success stories of Brazil and South Africa, in both cases, their interests and their actions were not changed by threats, economic threats, threats of force. They were persuaded that it was in their interest to give up their weapons programs because of the incentives that they were offered, because of the security guarantees they were offered, because of the diplomatic accords that were reached. And so while these cases are not identical to Iran and North Korea, you've got different ideologically driven regimes there that might not respond in the same rational way. I think that some variation of a carrot approach trying to persuade states to give up their weapons programs has a better track record of success and is more consonant with the NPT's foundation as a political bargain.
Should students at Warwick be studying recent events to give them a more modern perspective to their research?
I think students do need to keep up with what's going on in the world because it's going to shape their future. And as it's changing, our responses to these phenomena have to change too. And right now, we really are in a bit of a conundrum about how to deal with these issues of rogue states and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And we need new ideas. And where do new ideas come from? They don't tend to come from politicians who've been in office for 20 years. They come from new people, new ideas, students who are thinking about these things and bringing their research into the really hard-hitting, rigorous thinking about what should we do about these issues.